Folks, no, I'm unmuted now, so I can speak. Well, folks, welcome to the team LinkedIn Live. We have a serious subject to talk about today, and I'm really fortunate to have Rhys Thomas, Managing Director of the WTT Group, and Seb Sauca, CEO and co-founder of SafeRec, two experts who know what's coming down the track with our new reforms from the government. Gentlemen, do say your introductions and we'll get into the session. But thank you very much for supporting us. Seb, you've been a partner with team for about a year or so now. WTT, you're just joining, which is great news. Really happy to have you here. And Rhys, you're a lawyer as well as MD, which really helps with this process and understanding the changes that recruitment is going to be having. I do feel that probably 70% of the recruitment market aren't aware of what's coming down the track with regard to umbrella reforms and the detail, and also the Employment Rights Bill. So these sessions are really important so that we can plan for the future, and it's not going to upset us or our clients and candidates going forward. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'll do quick introductions. Maybe I'll go first and then jump on to Seb. As Simon says, I'm Rhys Thomas. I'm co-founder and managing director at the WTT Group of Companies, which is a tax investigations firm, accountancy firm, insurance provider, and a law firm. We specialise very squarely in the contingent labour, contingent worker sector, advising corporates and individuals on compliance matters focused around the contingent labour supply chain. So, yeah, we like to think we're very comfortable in advising and answering your questions today.
My name is Sebastian Sauca. I'm the CEO of SafeRec. CEO is really two sides. On one side, we have a certification for umbrella company, and I'm going to briefly talk to you about that later. Just one slide, not too much, mainly talking about the legislation here. And on the other side, we have a SaaS platform for recruitment agency and MSP, where they can really have visibility of their supply chain and ensuring that taxes for their worker have been accurately calculated and paid to HMRC.
Well, thank you, guys. The title of this session is Umbrella Reform, What's Coming, what the draft legislation means for your agency. So I think you're going to kick things off, aren't you, Rhys?
I am indeed, yes.
No, we need some
slides.
Yeah, thank you. It'll work.
Thank you.
It'll work. It always does. It'll work. Jahish is in the background, spinning the wheels and making it happen. Come on, Jahish.
Fantastic. So we're going to keep it fairly high level today, everyone. I'm sure all of you on the call has seen the legislation and seen lots and lots of commentary on it. We're going to try and keep it as kind of commercially minded as possible. I'm conscious that a deep dive into legislation can get, there's probably a better word than boring, but let's just stick with boring. And I think, therefore, if we can focus on some of the commercial practicalities of the situation, it's going to provide for a much better and more informative experience for everyone on the call. So that's what we're going to do. That being said, you should feel free to ask questions throughout the session. We will get to them. Whether or not we answer them immediately, we will try and cover everything. So if you've got any burning questions or you want to ask anything, please do post there. And then Jahish has very helpfully indicated where to post that at the bottom of your screen. So what is changing? As we know, the UK government is legislating an attempt to combat tax avoidance, which has been operating pretty prolifically for many years via non-compliant umbrella companies. We're always hesitant to call them umbrella companies. It gives a bad reputation to those compliant umbrella companies that we work with and do a great job in terms of managing the workforce for agencies and the rest of the supply chain. But HMRC and the government are clearly targeting an attempt to try and get rid of those tax avoidance umbrellas that have been allowed to operate for too long. The draft measures introduce joint and several liability, and we'll talk in more depth as to what joint and several liability really means in the scope. The legislation doesn't yet cover the NIC portion of the recovery that is intended to be amended into the Social Securities Act, Social Securities and Contributions Act later on. So we'll see some further draft legislation later on, but for now it focuses around PAYE and the collection through PAYE regulations and Reg 80 collections on corporate entities. It applies to any supply chain where a worker is supplied via a third-party employer, and as we're typically talking here, that's usually through an umbrella. And the target is obviously schemes retaining tax and NIC through disguised remuneration or deliberate non-payment. Intended to take effect in April 2026, although we do have the draft legislation now. That draft legislation is subject to a technical review, but we anticipate it will largely enter into legislation as is currently drafted. So who is in scope? Well, the recruitment agencies contracting with umbrella companies, MSPs facilitating worker supply chains, end hirers are not directly liable where there's a UK agency, but where there is no UK agency sat in the supply chain, then end hirers also become liable for the tax risk. If there is an agency, though, we need to be mindful here that reputational risk is considerable too, and we need to take into consideration those subsidiary risks that sit around the supply chain, and obviously umbrella companies as defined in the legislation now, and also purported umbrellas where the structure is kind of masked or opaque, as we commonly see in this sector. So the key definitions, again, I'm not going to put the legislation up in too much detail. We can provide links to it if you want to see it, but I'm going to try and keep it high level. An umbrella company is now defined, and that is the entity that employs the worker and supplies services to a third party, but is not the end client. Appears to be an umbrella, but doesn't, a purported umbrella is there as an entity that appears to be an umbrella, but doesn't meet the compliance requirements. A relevant party is then defined, and there is any intermediary between the end hirer and the umbrella, which is typically the agency or the MSP for the purpose of this conversation. And the worker is the individual subject to PAYE by the umbrella. Those key definitions give a kind of outside of the context of the legislation. I appreciate they seem a little bit remote, but those are what we really need to start to understand to get a handle on the depth of the legislation. The legislative framework itself comes in as a new chapter 11 under ITEPA, and it inserts sections 61Z1 to 61Z8, and it indicates that umbrella companies that operate PAYE and NIC as the employer, but if they fail, HMRC then issue joint and several liability notices to the appropriate next entity in the supply chain. And it also introduces enforcement powers to collect the tax from the relevant parties. There are two aspects to tax in this regard. There are really three, but the two here are, is the tax due? And then who does HMRC collect the tax from? So that legislative framework looks at initially, where is the tax going? But the collection powers also need to be amended so that HMRC can actually physically collect the tax from other entities in the supply chain. So joint and several liability in HMRC's guidance, it says joint and several liability will allow HMRC to pursue an agency in the first instance any payroll taxes that a non-compliant umbrella company fails to remit to HMRC on their behalf. The end client will be liable if contracting directly with an umbrella company. I think that gives a nice little summary over what the real intention behind this legislation is. So joint and several liability allows HMRC to go after the agency, to collect the tax from the agency. It presents a huge number of issues. Right? If we pass a full gross payment over to an umbrella, and then all of a sudden that's followed up, and then HMRC are coming back to you asking for the tax, is a real liability risk here. So we need to be identifying that liability risk really early on, Seb's going to talk through some risk mitigation strategies and what needs to happen to counter that. But it's something that's a real risk here. And so agencies really need to start preparing for it now. And we'll talk through how they can prepare throughout the course of this session. Implications. Agencies, there's strict liability. So I've heard some commentary that originally in the consultation paper, there was an intention for HMRC to look at due diligence methods and agencies being able to evidence that they've taken reasonable care in engaging certain umbrellas or have carried out certain audit requirements. That's gone. We're into joint and several liability here now. So it doesn't matter what due diligence you've undertaken, HMRC will not look to exclude agencies who have taken appropriate due diligence steps. This is joint and several liability, which means you are liable for the tax if the umbrella company does not pay it. So yes, due diligence is now obligatory. There's no way to get around this anymore, but it's also not a defense. So the due diligence is not a kind of cursory protection against the legislation in terms of escaping liability. It's very much protecting your business from financial risk here. So now due diligence is obligatory. We're going to start to see some changes taking place in the market. We already are. There'll be a definitely reductions of PSL. We'd expect agencies to reduce, and we'll come on to MSPs, but we'd expect agencies to start reducing their preferred supplier lists of umbrellas down. There's going to be some mission creep we see sometimes is where particular agencies and particular consultants within those agencies will have their preferred umbrellas that are onto an additional supplier list or are kind of ad hoc added to workers, or workers come to the agency with their preferred umbrella. That needs to stop. There definitely needs to be a defined list of umbrellas that agencies allow their workers to work through, and there needs to be some real top to bottom appreciation of that and the risk associated with that. So we're talking about company-wide acknowledgement of the risk here. We're not just talking about leadership team or compliance team or legal team. We're talking about company-wide. Everyone needs to know the extent of the liability here if certain umbrellas are used, or those umbrellas that are not defined within the PSL are used. But clearly we have risk of unexpected tax bills. We're talking here about vetting umbrellas. Umbrellas need to be vetted for tax liability, but also financial due diligence on the umbrellas, right? We're talking here, what if the umbrella goes into liquidation, then they're not paying the tax, and then there's going to be a transfer of liability up. So we need to be looking at financial due diligence of the umbrellas on your PSL as well. Reviewing the employment contracts, reviewing the pay slips that are used, and those contracts now need to make sure there are appropriate indemnities and flow down provisions in your contracts to protect against those liabilities. But again, indemnities and flow down provisions are only really enforceable against entities that have cash to pay any indemnity or liability. Equally, you may say, well, they go onto the insurance policy. Well, if we're talking about tax avoidance here, the likelihood is that insurance policy is not going to protect against any tax avoidance measures being taken. So again, the real answer to protecting here is due diligence in advance. The real answer is making sure your PSL and your entire supply chain is protected by carrying out the necessary risk mitigation steps that we'll talk through. MSP implications. Again, the MSP could be liable if the subcontracted umbrella companies are non-compliant. There's, again, greater need for flow down obligations in contracts. We see this quite commonly with MSPs that they're already flow down obligations, so I'd expect those to be in place. But again, the same provision applies, right? If the umbrella company is no longer in existence or is a tax avoidance vehicle overseas and can shut up shop overnight, then your flow down and indemnity provisions are at risk anyway. Exposure increases where you're operating a master vendor model with layered supply chains. Obviously, the depth and the extent of some of the supply chains that are associated with MSPs are huge. And so there's a big audit task that needs to be undertaken at the moment. We need to be mindful of that. And agencies should expect that where they're engaged with an MSP, that they should expect to have compliance obligations placed on them upcoming, and agencies will need to prove that they are operating compliantly and that they're engaging subcontractors, they're engaging sub-suppliers in a compliant way. So do engage in that, do engage in any compliance process that comes your way, because for our MSPs that we'll be advising audit processes that go through, and for agencies that don't respond to the compliance obligations, they will unfortunately need to be cut. So do take steps to respond to any requests from the higher up levels in the supply chain, because you can get a bit of first mover advantage here, and there might be some greater opportunity for throughput. So lots of opportunity, lots of commercial opportunity associated with it if you get it right. And that's really why we want to have these kind of presentations, so that you can start getting it right now and really start to position yourself in the market as one of the leaders in compliance, which is going to do really well in terms of obtaining, retaining and winning new clients. So the timeline, there is consultation now with stakeholders over the draft legislation, although, as I say, I think it will largely be entered into primary legislation as is drafted, but we shall see. Early 2026, then expected to be included into the finance bill, and then April 2026, said at the start, is expected to go live. As I say that, start prepping now. We, as a market, generally like to prepare quite late on when it's coming in, but we need to be thinking here that, let's say you've got 10, 15 umbrellas on your PSL, you've got another 10 on your ASL, you've got workers operating through there. There's a huge admin task to streamline that PSL now. It's a lot. And so you are going to need some time here. HMRC are going to be hot on this. We're already seeing heightened activity, not around this, but around agencies and the implication of Section 44 legislation. So start prepping now if you can. And obviously this session is designed to try and help you through that. So I'm going to pass over to Seb, who's going to give some more practical guidance around the implementation and the steps that you should be taking to prepare against that.
Sure. Should we see if there is any question before, or at this stage, just under the legislation, Simon, maybe?
Yeah, Grant has asked a question, a very relevant one. Does CIS tax come under this legislation?
I think CIS is going to be an interesting one with its interaction, right? So CIS, I think the answer is yes, because there are CIS umbrellas that are operating as tax avoidance vehicles. What's going to be interesting is the interaction of how the CIS process operates in line with the withholding taxes. I think we're going to need some greater clarity around that. We're going to need some greater certainty. And the interaction of CIS is going to be very, very much questioned, particularly the issues around expenses, I would say. There's a lot of unknowns around expenses, and we all know that the expenses regime in the CIS sector is at sometimes questionable. And I think HMRC will be taking a very close look into that. Will we see some changes to CIS to align with some of this draft legislation? I don't know. I don't know what's next on the roster. But yes, I mean, the construction industry will definitely need to fall in line with this legislation.
Good question. Thank you very much, Rhys. Right, we need your slide, Seth.
Perfect.
Yeah, you can do it.
Perfect. So what I'm going to do is try to just like get out of the legislation and really break it down exactly where the risk is coming from, for you to really understand by what you have to check, and also plan for the future, because there is solution that exists today. I'm sure there will be other solutions that exist tomorrow. And the goal, obviously, as a recruitment agency or MSP, is to make sure that you have a solution to this big piece of the legislation that have been released last week. So, Jaisha, if we can go to the next slide. So the first thing that I'm going up, I can navigate myself. Perfect. So the first thing I want to do is really explain where the risk is coming from. And for that, you need to understand the process of what's happening in an umbrella company. Well, firstly, they generate payroll and they issue a payslip. Send it, and the payslip is being sent to the worker. When the payslip is being sent to the worker, normally what happens after is you have an XML file, an RTI that's being sent to HMRC, describing the amount of taxes that will need to be paid. And these taxes are being paid on the government getaway of the umbrella company. And what the umbrella company is doing is exactly the same thing that you guys are doing, is to go on your HMRC tax account and effectively pay the bill to HMRC. Now, what is really interesting and important here is that it's not because you have a payslip that you have an RTI. It's not because you have an RTI that the RTI has been sent to HMRC. And it's not because the RTI has been sent to HMRC that taxes have been paid to HMRC. And this is where the problem lay with this legislation, with this new piece of legislation that HMRC released last week, is that joint and several liability, as Rhys said, is basically saying it doesn't matter which processes you have in place. If taxes have not been paid to HMRC, you on the hook. And what is going to be important for recruitment agency like yourself is that when you engage with umbrella company, you just really understand who they are, and you understand that the 3 steps you see on your screen right now is being followed. So it's not about auditing payslip. I've seen that sometimes. It's not about having payslip and RTI. It's good, but all of that is just like mitigation measure. If you really want to be protected, you need to have a process in place where check the payslip, you check the RTI sent to HMRC, and you have evidence that taxes for the worker that the umbrella company pay for you is effectively paid to HMRC, and therefore there is no liability. So we always talk about the liability, and something that I haven't said before is my background is actually recruitment. I used to work in recruitment as a sales director, and actually became director in 2017. And I remember people talking about liability. And the problem with liability is a word that everyone is throwing around, but what type of liability are we actually talking about? So I'm going to go on the next slide. Can you all see the next slide? Yeah, it worked perfect. So what I've done here is effectively create a matrix. And the matrix is very simple. The first line is the umbrella rate, the rate that the worker negotiate with you, the recruitment agency. And you can see it go from £16.50 per hour to £50 per hour. And the first column is the amount of workers that the umbrella company process for you, pay for you. And here you have the liability annually. So based on the number of contractors that you have, you can have an average of the rate. You can have roughly an understanding of the type of liability that we're talking about right now. And you can see that only 100 workers barely paid £20 per hour. Bear in mind that £16.50 is close to the national minimum wage, is already 1 million a year liability. So obviously, bigger your recruitment agency, more worker you have, and higher the rate is, the higher your liability is going to be. And I think that this matrix just illustrates how important it is for you to really understand the umbrella companies that you are working with. So obviously, we have this big piece of legislation. There is absolutely no defense mechanism. That means that you need to work with organizations that can demonstrate they effectively pay taxes to HMRC. So how do we do that, and what does that mean for umbrella? for recruitment agency, yourself, and for MSP as well, if there is some MSP on the live today. So firstly, what joint and several liability means for umbrella company. But what it means is that, and I think this is something that is important to understand, because sometimes when I meet an umbrella company, there is this logic that, well, we know we're compliant, we don't need to show it to anyone. And I really don't believe it works like that. The world we live in, the commercial world we live in, is that as organization, you in the recruitment agency, or Rhys at WDT, or me at SafeRec, is that we solve problem for our clients. This is why organization exists. And this is why they effectively make money, in a nutshell. The reality here is that recruitment agency, the umbrella company's client, is just going to have a big problem. And I have absolutely no doubt that is also the responsibility for umbrella company to provide evidence that taxes have been paid to HMRC. And for you as an organization to have absolute certainty that it's been done, you need to follow 4 steps. Step 1, payslip. It's not enough, but it's still important. Have taxes been accurately calculated on the payslip? Secondly, proof of accurate RTI submission to HMRC. You need to have the RTI, and have the RTI been sent to HMRC. But again, these 2 steps are far from being enough. You need to have the evidence that the RTI has been sent to HMRC and has been taken in consideration by HMRC. And this is exactly the step 3, which is proof that taxes have been paid to HMRC. And if you do these 3 steps, it's good. But what's great is that if you can get this proof from an independent party. When I worked in recruitment, I was more or less the point of contact for umbrella company. And this is what I used to say, and this is what I'm saying today as well, is that 100% of umbrella company that called me were saying 100% of the time they were 100% compliant. It never happened that you have an umbrella company that call you and say, well, you know, we are 97, 98% compliant, but sometimes it's just like that just doesn't exist. So if you get evidence from the umbrella companies that they are compliant, obviously you're never going to get evidence that's not the case, if you see what I mean. So I think that for umbrella company, it's important that they have all of that in place. And I think it's important for recruitment agency like yourself that you work with umbrella companies that can evidence that. And that leads to, but what does that mean for recruitment agency? So obviously there is a few crossover with the umbrella, but the first point, and it's a big one, is act now. So the reason why you need to act now is because you have a rendezvous, to use the French words, with April 2026. And basically what is going to happen in April 2026 is if you haven't done what you should have done, is that your tax liability is going to ramp up. And this is not something you'll be able to solve 4 weeks at the beginning of May or at the beginning of July. When taxes are not paid to HMRC, the liability is going to be yours. So you need to have everything in place, and you need to be ready by April 2026. April 2026 is not the moment where you need to start looking into it. April 2026 is a moment where you are ready. So there is 2 scenarios here. The first is that you've done already a lot with your umbrella company. You have a PSL and of umbrella company you are comfortable with that you can enforce, which is not always easy depending on which industry you're working in. But you have a PSL, you're comfortable. Obviously, the transition and the preparation to April 2026 is going to be relatively, at least it's going to be easier. Maybe not easy, but it's going to be easier. However, if you don't have a PSL in place, if you're not enforcing a PSL today, if you are working in an industry that is complicated to enforce a PSL like healthcare, and you have 50 umbrella company, you really need to put and to get everything sorted from right now. Because as Rhys said, the admin burden you're going to have from moving one worker from an umbrella company, potentially a tax avoidance umbrella company that is effectively providing a better net pay to the worker, moving this worker to a compliant umbrella company where they're going to get less money, well, that's not going to be a process that's necessarily going to be nice to go through. So point number 1 don't wait, act now. You need to be ready for April 2026. And even if you think that there is a consultation, at the moment, the consultation, as we said, is a technical consultation. So it's not, we're going to change what's going to happen. It's more, let's see what we can tweak to make sure that there is no unintended consequences. But April 2026, you have 99.99% of chances this is what's going to happen in April. So make sure that you start working on it right now. The point 2 and 3, but this is what we talked. I think that there is something that exists today, and I'm going to tell you very briefly about what we do. Real-time auditing by a third party. There is absolutely no question in my mind, and it's not because I'm the CEO of SafeRec, it's really because I believe it as well, that this is the way forward. As a recruitment agency, you can work with umbrella companies that are audited in real time. And again, audited is not the payslip, not the RTI, is payslip plus RTI plus HMRC tax account. Point 3, this is what I mentioned earlier. If you really want to protect your business, you need to have proof of compliance from a third party, ideally. And the last point, point 4, it's an important one because there is several conversations about indemnity and insurance. I think that indemnity is something that some recruitment agency will want to have in their contract with umbrella company. But when you see the amount of liability every single month, every single year that the umbrella company need to pay, but from my point of view, there is no doubt that if you are an umbrella company and you're not compliant and you can put indemnity clause in the contracts that you have with the agency, obviously if HMRC come talk to you, but you simply can close the business and there is no indemnity clause that are going to be paid if the business doesn't exist anymore. The second point that is important, and there are insurance products that are in the design at the moment and that will be ready, there is no doubt, very soon. It's about protecting your business and having an insurance policy that effectively ensure that if taxes are not paid by the umbrella company, well, effectively what's going to happen is the insurer will pay the bill for you. This is something we're working on at SafeRec at the moment, should be like very, very soon. The goal is to protect effectively recruitment agency, and when they work with certain type of umbrella company, but effectively they are protected. That is for what does that mean in terms of liability for recruitment agency. And the last slide on this section is effectively, but what does that mean for MSP? And MSP, they are in a little bit of a problem because they don't deal with umbrella company directly. They deal with agency, and agency deal with umbrella company. So if they are a master MSP and they recruit directly for the end client and they use an umbrella company, but in the case of a recruitment agency, so it's not a problem. But when they really an MSP with second tier recruitment agency, it is going to be more complicated. And I think there is 2 steps that they need to take. Firstly is use technology. This is something that we do at SafeRec, but I'm sure that there's going to be other technology out there where MSP can effectively have access to a platform when they can see their supply chain. And the second point, and that is something that we definitely are going to see, and this is something that we mentioned, is that MSP are going to review their contract with recruitment agency. And what they will want to have is they will need to have some reassurance that as a recruitment agency, either you have some mitigation measure in place or you work with certain type of umbrella company to make sure that their risk is mitigated. There are also some scenario which is potentially bad news for recruitment agency and for umbrella company. Don't really believe in it, but it's possible that we might move toward a margin-only model, where the MSP is saying, well, we are going to engage a worker directly with an umbrella company. However, we're going to give the agency not the full amount of money, but only the margin. Don't really believe it's going to happen. I think it's going to be complicated for MSP to afford that. But obviously, the goal here is to provide some clarity, and this is something that potentially can happen. Finally, the last slide is just to tell you quickly about the SafeRec certification and what we do about for umbrella company, and review a little bit exactly what I've been discussing so far. This is something that existed for 2 years. So if you work with SafeRec certified umbrella company, you got this 5-layer of protection that you can see on your screen. But number one, you have a pretty thorough several months of legal review conducted by a law firm for the SafeRec certification is WTT that is effectively doing it. Then we audit the payslip in real time that we get directly from the payroll software, not the umbrella. We get the RTI sent to HMRC that we also get from the payroll software, not the umbrella. And every single month, we reconcile payslip and RTI with the HMRC tax account of the umbrella company, ensuring that taxes have been paid. And we send to your agency proof that taxes for all your workers have been paid. And the last layer of protection that you have with SafeRec certified umbrella company is really the fact that in our contract, if an umbrella company is found to be non-compliant, for the business that is certified or any other associated company, what we do, we remove the certification and we update all the historic and current clients that they lost the certification and why. So the goal of this contract is very simple. If the umbrella company is SafeRec certified, as they say, brilliant. We want to sign this contract. If the umbrella company is not compliant, well, it's a bit more complicated to sign a contract like that. That's it for me. I think the next slide is not very interesting. It's just my face, effectively. So definitely not interesting. But this is for it. Obviously, welcome any question. I saw that a few popped up. So maybe we're going to cover that, Simon. But that is for me with a more maybe like a practical for agency view on it.
Yeah, I know Grant runs a lot of temps for in the construction space, so he's really focused on this. And thank you for joining us.
If we have got time on that, Simon, I'd love to go into a little bit more detail around the CIS point because I think it was a really good question. I think it's an interesting one because, as I say, this draft legislation does need to align. It aligns with all workers, right? We're talking about temporary workers. Under the current drafting, it would suggest that genuinely self-employed people would not be caught by this legislation. As we know, this is about employed temporary workers through umbrellas. I think going back to the point on expenses, there are some question marks through the CIS regime as to what is actually happening in terms of supervision, direction, and control. And from our tax investigation side of the business, we've definitely seen a heightened activity from HMRC in terms of operating or moving into that CIS space and using pre-existing legislation, not needing to rely on any legislation coming in or draft legislation coming in, to assert that there is supervision, direction, and control taking place, and therefore that those are or should be deemed employed workers. So I think this legislation will not necessarily directly impact genuinely self-employed workers, but this direction of travel in terms of the scrutiny over the industry, and I think the application of HMRC's approach to this market with this draft legislation is going to have a direct impact on that CIS world. I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't know whether this is to be anticipated, but I do think that CIS feels like to me the next space where HMRC might start to tighten up on a few things, and it will be interesting to see what happens in that space with this draft legislation coming in and the general approach to umbrellas in that CIS space. But the draft legislation as it is, to clarify, is not looking at genuinely self-employed people, or it's not seeking to catch genuinely self-employed people, but we just need to make sure that they are genuinely self-employed, right? It's as we see in the CIS world, not always the case.
Yeah, good. There was another question there. I've put a message out to our partner insurance company, Marsh, who you all know specialize in recruitment insurance, because I think you will need to look at the covering yourself in some way, shape, or form on joint liability. But as Rhys identified, if you need to ensure that your partner with your umbrella is compliant, because if they're not, or there's any elements where that exposes you, they're going to come after you anyway. So you need to be really careful about whatever policy you're entering. So I've got a little flick back from Marsh already, but I'll publicise that to everyone on this call. I'll send you an update on opportunities and contact details for Marsh. Just have a conversation without commitment on what sort of cover you can get. Seb, one of the things that we do with quite a lot of our partners is we track their, we do some tracking on their financial situation. All our umbrella partners, I'm going to start tracking those, but you're sort of doing that already, aren't you, for your clients?
Yeah, so one, this is what we do, but we even going to go a little bit further through. And I think this is a question that was just before with Grant. So I'm going to take two questions and merge and create one answer. And I think the question for Grant was, we are also asking umbrella company for compliance pack, do you have a template of information that we should request? So to answer your question, Simon, yes, this is what we do. And to answer Bo's question, we also have a free platform. So Grant, for an example, you can go on safrec.co.uk and we have effectively a free tool called Umbrella Management for you to conduct due diligence. Again, from April 2026 is not going to be enough, but the tools that we have is effectively helping recruitment agency to not only get a compliance pack, because the problem with the compliance pack is you ask some pieces of documents like the contract of employment, but a lot of recruitment agency even don't know what they need to check in the contract of employment or the step, if you see what I mean. So what the tool is doing, and again, it's free, is effectively guiding you through what you need to check inside each document. And to answer your question, Simon, because I still haven't answered it, we are also going to add on the platform basically a credit score. So we're in contact at the moment with Credit Safe to effectively have something that is going to be very simple for recruitment agency, where they can be a recruitment agency, they create a free account on SafeRec, they can add all their SafeRec certified umbrella company, and they can have effectively a score, a financial score, to ensure that obviously everything is above board.
That sounds good and vital. I was trying to work. I don't know how many umbrella companies there are out there. When I looked at the SIC codes, it puts them under 78200, which is also the space where temp agencies live. So I don't know how many umbrella companies out there, but the ones that you work with or that you're working with and are registered with you, Seb, how many have you got under your umbrella, if you excuse the phrase and the pun?
No worries. We have 37 umbrella companies that are certified by us that go through the 5 steps that I showed you. And we have another 12 in the process. And that represents approximately over 55,000 payslip every single week.
Cool. That's cool. That is that's why we wanted you to join us. That service is superb for our members and the marketplace as well. Kerry, yes, we will be updating our template interim T's and C's. Don't worry, to fit the new legislations. How do you think this will affect the umbrella market? Hopefully, it's going to get rid of the bad guys. But how do you see things shaping up, both of you? A question for both of you there. You shake it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I have a tendency to talk over people, so I just like trying to be respectful. I think that it depends. Like, listen, I really do believe that the umbrella companies that work with us, they've been ready since we launched the certification 2 years ago. So for them, it's great news. Obviously, all umbrella companies are a little bit behind the curve. Listen, the entire process for them to have access to a solution like we do is really like 4 or 5 months. So they have time to be ready for April 2026. But I think that is going to be the reaction and the proactiveness of umbrella company is really going to depend on you, the clients. So if you just say to the umbrella company, I will see that next year, well, they're not going to be under a lot of pressure. If you have recruitment agencies that say, now there is a new legislation, we want to be ready for April 2026, what are you going to do for us? Because we have a business relationship, but the rules of the game just change. So we need to understand exactly what's going to happen. So I think that, Dan, to answer your question, so how quickly, the question is more like how strong are you going to be in your communication with your umbrella company? Depending, obviously, there is different variable like the size of the recruitment agency. But if you're an SME or large umbrella company, or large recruitment agency, you are going to have some leverage to say to them, this is what needs to happen. And the deadline is December 2025. And if you're not ready and you don't give us this level of and assurance by then, well, we'll have to work with other provider.
Cool.
I think I think from my perspective, I would expect to see some consolidation in the umbrella market. So I do think there will be some interesting steps. I would expect to see agencies shortening their PSLs, or at least minimizing those to something more manageable in terms of auditing. I think with tools like SafeRec, of course, I mean, you could have a PSL of 37 and you're still getting the same auditing process and the same details for each one of those 37. So it doesn't necessarily need to be minimized, but I think there does need to be much greater auditing taking place on some of them. I think to come back to the previous question around how quickly are we seeing umbrellas prepare, I think Seb went some way to the same answer as me, but I think it's not necessarily even umbrellas that are preparing for compliance with the legislation, right? You would hope that a lot of umbrellas are already compliant in line with the legislation because they're paying the taxes across to HMRC, they're doing everything correctly, they're managing the workers appropriately on behalf of the agencies. I think the obligation here is on the agencies to prepare proactively. Yes, the umbrella will be able to provide the documentation, the evidence, the pay slips, the HMRC account, all of that stuff, unless you're using a tool, like a proper tool to do that through SafeRec. But I think it's more on the agencies to prepare proactively in line with the legislation. And I'm a great believer in compliance-led commercials. There's a lot of people in this industry that have been calling for umbrella legislation for a long time now. And I think it's a great opportunity for agencies to go to clients, go and win new contracts and to say, look, I've already prepared. I already have all of the data on all of my umbrellas. I have already accounted for all of the tax liability. I have this bundle. I know that our supply chain is protected. You have nothing to fear from the legislation. And going out and winning new clients in that way, I think is a great opportunity for agencies. So I would probably slightly spin the question to say, I'd be keen to see the agencies preparing proactively for compliance with the legislation. I would like to think that a lot of umbrellas are already compliant, but the agencies are now the ones at risk.
Cool.
Just to answer a question, I saw a question for Grant just earlier, as I was saying, some of our umbrella company use SafeRec and we receive report directly from SafeRec. However, the report don't come on a regular basis, should be received monthly on a set day. So we can't do that by definition. I'm going to tell you why, Grant. Is because we exclusively send the report when we have guarantees that taxes have been paid to HMRC. So obviously that sometime is happening, and sometime, let's say that, for an example, we are for the month of January, taxes need to be paid by the 22nd of February. So we have a meeting after the 22nd of February, and sometimes the payment has been made a few days before, but it's not shown on HMRC that the amount is cleared. So we need to book another meeting, and obviously we need to adjust with the availability of the umbrella company, etc., etc. So this is, for that, it's complicated over 37 organizations to say exactly on the same day this is what's going to happen, and it's just because. And I want to speak negatively about HMRC because they've done a decent job with this legislation, but I know we call that real-time information. But I can guarantee you it's really not real time. There is like a weekly time information, if you see what I mean. So this is why you have a little bit of a delay, and why it's not really possible over 37 organizations to have the same confirmation and the same email being sent, if you see what I mean.
Thank you for that. I've got a couple of other questions that I think some of the other labour reforms that is going to affect temporary workers and how those recruitment companies that run those temporary workers. The Employment Rights Bill proposes to extend agency workers' rights, guaranteed hours, offers, notice of shift changes, compensation for cancellations to umbrella workers. I'm concerned how agencies are going to manage these new obligations when they do not directly employ the worker. So it's the umbrella that does that. That's probably not a question you guys can answer, but I'm raising it so for our attendees to fire questions to me that I can push up the line to HMRC with our friends at the REC, because we are still challenging them on some of the processes.
I mean, there's a lot in the idea that is unworkable in terms of practicality. I think we could have another entire session on that.
I know
it's even longer, but
there's
a huge amount of extension there that I think has genuine, perhaps unforeseen, but definitely unintended consequences. And I like to think that will be adjusted in due course. I know that there's a lot of feedback going from the right voices from the industry on that. So we shall see. But I think there's some basically unworkable situations in there. But again, it looks fairly consistently like it's an attempt to try and streamline that channel for payrolling and PAYE collection from HMRC into a much easier to manage channel, which is what they're trying to do always. Look at off payroll legislation, movement into that obligation to collect tax more effectively and more quickly. This is the same here. It's consistently designed with that in mind. So it's quite interesting, but I agree with you. It's unworkable. I think there was a question. There was a question I saw the other day from someone around timeframes for collection. I don't think we've necessarily addressed that in this session, but in the draft legislation, Regulation 80 is amended. Reg 80 is the collection mechanism for HMRC to collect underpayment of PAYE from corporates. And the Reg 80 determination window is 4 years in the main. So HMRC can issue a determination to a corporate entity 4 years historically. So if you go back to Seb's matrix there, there's some pretty serious consequences associated with that risk if HMRC, as they had done for years and years and years, not said anything for 3 years and then issued a Regulation 80 determination on year 4, the agency could be blissfully unaware for 3.5 years and then get an assessment for a year previously, and then the next year get the next year. And so you've got 4 years worth of tax to catch up on. So it's you can spot from that draft legislation, the amendment to Reg 80 is where the assessment's going to come from. So the typical time frame on that is 4 years.
Thank you for that. The other point I'd like to make to the attendees is Labour's plan to make work pay proposes day one unfair dismissal rights and the ability to request predictable hours, compensation for cancelled shifts, and the abolition of the worker status. How will these rights apply to umbrella company employees placed by agencies? And will the requirement to use probationary periods or fixed term contracts change umbrella employment models? I'd be interested to see if you've got any comments on that for you folks, or whether I should talk to directly to our umbrella partners and get them on a call. That would be pretty cool.
I think again, it's one of the unworkable situations, right? It's umbrella companies taking on more obligations.
Yeah.
But taking on more obligations of a standardized employer, of which they're being deemed to be. I don't think it's necessarily around whether or not they want to act as a formal employer in the supply chain. It's about the management of that worker when they don't actually even necessarily have any control or supervision over that worker. They can't. And there's broader considerations around that as well, in some of the legislation that's already been implemented. So yeah, it all falls into the same category of unworkability, and umbrellas are going to need to prepare for that if that's the way it goes. But let's see, I think, on that.
Those temporary workers, those workers will be eligible for day one sick pay as well. So that'll be interesting, and see how the productivity is affected by that when that comes in. Gentlemen, thank you very much for a very informative, and we put a lot of clarity into some of the questions that people offered. Some of my action items will be, I'll get some stuff out to all attendees with regard to, from Marsh, on insurance options. And if perhaps we have a bit of a follow-up, if there's any changes or modifications made after discussions with our friends at HMRC, if there's some of the unworkable elements of what's proposed, we can give some clarity to. But thank you, Rhys. Thank you, Seb, for your brilliant support today. And I hope the attendees go away with a little bit more clarity, and also with a plan to really put all the processes in place to make sure you're compliant, ready and steady. And I'll also be making sure that all of our umbrella partners are constantly credit checked every month, so that we'll liaise with you, Seb, to rank and look at your credit scores, which is a brilliant way for our partners and any recruitment business to follow. And I'm right in saying your services are free to recruitment companies, aren't they?
Yes. So we have a part that is a paid. We have paid plan, obviously, because we need to make money at some point as well. But we have like a huge freemium. So really, the idea behind what we do is to have a business model that is similar to a platform like Canva, for example, where you can do pretty much quite a lot without actually paying. The goal is really to democratize compliance, and that small organizations that, as you know, there is 70% of recruitment agencies in this country which have less than 10 employees. All these organizations that maybe don't have the money to just like pay legal advice or anything like that, they have a platform where they can do due diligence at no cost.
Cool. Well, thank you very much indeed. Have a good day, folks. See you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.